The major Derby preps have been run. So now what? Let's talk about it on this episode of the Win Place Show. Salutations and welcome, friends, to another episode of the Win Place Show. I am your host, Matthew DeSantis, and you can find me on Twitter at the handle at Failed to Menace. Well, thank you so much for tuning into the Win Place Show, which is your one-stop shop for all information horse racing and handicapping related as we head down to the stretch of the Kentucky Derby and the Triple Crown. Every week, I come and talk to you all about race recaps, give you some horse racing news, track updates, jockey updates, etc. So, make sure to press that subscribe button here on Trust the Profits, because if you want Derby content, if you want graded stakes content, if you want international racing, domestic racing, if you want live betting, we got you covered. We have something for everyone here on Trust the Profits. So make sure to press that subscribe button. We've been gaining subscribers left and right. We're over 8,500 people. 8,500 people can't be wrong, right? Well, they might be, but in this case, they're not. So press that subscribe button. Make sure to like this video. Comment below with what was your biggest takeaway from a crazy, jam-packed, graded stakes weekend. And maybe let me know who your early Kentucky Derby bet is for the big race, the first Saturday in May. Well, let's dive straight into what was a full and exciting weekend of racing. And I first need to say a huge thank you to friend of the program here, friend of the Profits, Sarah El Badwi. Sarah's been on the show before. I know a lot of you really enjoyed our Friday Keeneland Stakes preview that we did together. Always appreciate having Sarah on and her expertise, but she's working up at NYRA now. And so I went up to the Big A, never been to Aqueduct before, went up to the Big A for the Wood Memorial weekend, hung out with two of my really good friends, Len and Greg, who those guys are from Philly. I met them in Charlestown. It's this weird horse racing, East Coast horse players kind of group that we have, and met up with some buddies there, and then went. And Sarah couldn't have been nicer, showed us around the track and got to meet Andy Serling, got to meet Acacia, got to meet Richie Miglioria and Maggie and everybody could not have been nicer. I mean, really genuinely sweet, kind people who, if you have a passion for horse racing, they enjoy talking to you about it. So thank you to Sarah. Thank you to all the good folks at NYRA for a really great weekend. And we're going to dive into some of that NYRA content here in a little bit. But listen, let's start the weekend with Keeneland. And let's start the weekend with just going over the Derby preps. Let's not try to bury the lead here. Okay, that's what everybody was looking at. And now, granted, I was really excited about the Appalachian Stakes, but that's we'll get to that in a little bit. Let's start with the Derby preps, and let's start with Keeneland. Bluegrass Stakes. It ended up being the showdown between the two favorites that in some ways I think we kind of hoped for a lot of times. TAPIT TRICE, Verifying. Okay, who you got? I was in team Verifying. I was worried about TAPIT TRICE's sluggish starts. I thought this was maybe a little better of a field than what he saw at the Tampa Bay Derby. And as a result, I was trying to look past him and look at Verifying there. They went off almost identical. I think TAPIT TRICE went off at 8-5. Verifying went off at 2-1. So very closely bet race in terms of the top two favorites. And they really separated themselves. I mean, they each had the trip they needed to have. And Verifying sat that stalking pace behind Major Blue, who was the early speed, and kind of had the perfect trip and was able to make his move at the top of the stretch. The difference this day was TAPIT TRICE and Luis Saez. Luis Saez makes all the difference. First of all, if two horses are head-to-head, 75 times out of 100, Luis Saez's horse is going to get home first because he's just stronger. And he's one of the best finishers and best closers that we have in jockeying right now. Now, what Saez did, which was so smart, I think, was TAPIT TRICE gets out and gets out better. Certainly. I mean, we're not talking about a horse that's breaking any land speed records out of the gate, but got out much better on the inside rail. Ended up getting shuffled back a little bit, was sitting kind of a little beyond mid-pack going into the first turn. But what Saez did was so smart. He took that horse wide because he knows the horse is going to, the question with TAPIT TRICE is never the distance. He can get the distance. And so he knew, something, if I travel a little bit wide, it's not going to be the end of the world. That's okay. So he tips the horse out wide down the backstretch and makes a middle move, which you really don't see at Keeneland very often. We talk about these middle moves at Oaklawn sometimes, places like that where it could be successful. Typically, you don't like to see a jockey make a big move in the middle of the backstretch, but that's exactly what he did. And he got TAPIT TRICE up to a real kind of a third, fourth place position, much, much closer to the lead. And then when they turned for home, TAPIT TRICE was in he was wide, but he was in a perfect position to kick for home, verifying TAPIT TRICE head to head coming down the stretch. And ultimately, TAPIT TRICE wins by about a half a length at the end of the day, earns a 99 Beyer speed figure for that effort. I'd imagine verifying will probably get a 98 Beyer speed figure or 97 at worst for that effort. But obviously, very, very strong efforts there from TAPIT TRICE, and verifying will be in the Kentucky Derby as well. That second place performance very much so solidified his position, partially because he did run that fourth place in the Rebel going back to Oaklawn. So, he's got some points already in his back pocket there. And so it was a big effort there for TAPIT TRICE. I think he answered a lot of questions that people had about, what's going to happen if he draws inside in the Kentucky Derby or closer to the inside in the Kentucky Derby. What's going to happen? And can he get away a little bit quicker? I mean, Louis Saez has got to really work on that horse. There's no doubt about it, but that was a much, much, much improved effort from what we saw in the Tampa Bay Derby. So it's good to see that progression from TAPIT TRICE, certainly, as he now goes in as one of the top favorites, I would imagine, for the Kentucky Derby. He is a horse that I still am a little worried about, just because Saez was able to make that move today, and that was a smart decision. Making that sort of a move in the Kentucky Derby is a little bit more dangerous. And so we'll see. But, if TAPIT TRICE continues to improve, then there's no reason to suspect that 99 can't get improved upon next time out in the Kentucky Derby. Like I said, the two of them really separated themselves from the rest of the group. Blazing Sevens, actually, I thought ran a much better race than I was expecting. Finished third. It was probably beaten by about 6-7 lengths by the other two, but did hit the board. And that was an improved performance for Blazing Sevens, certainly. Now, that was the Derby prep in the Bluegrass. I was up in New York for the Wood Memorial, and that race was chaos. And Lord Miles, oh my, Lord Miles at 59-1 wins a photo over Hit Show and Dreamlike, the top two choices on the board. Hit Show, of course, the winner of the Withers, Brad Cox horse. Dreamlike, the maiden, who has never won, but had posted two very impressive Beyer speed figures, and the Todd Pletcher trained colt. And the three of them come right down the stretch and ultimately Lord Miles on the outside gets the nose down. Hit Show on the inside or in the middle finishes second. Dreamlike on the inside finishes third. And that was a huge win, obviously, for Saffie Joseph Jr. What's so fascinating about Lord Miles, 59-1 on the board, earns a 93 Beyer speed figure. This was a horse, if you guys watched going back to the Holy Bull, this was actually, I think, I'd have to go back and check the tape, but in my notes, I had this down that he was my value play in the Holy Bull. This was a horse I did really like at one time, and he just turned in two really bad performances in the Holy Bull and in the Fountain of Youth, but he was in the rail both instances. And I thought, well, maybe the rail was a problem, or I shouldn't say the Fountain of Youth. He was in the Tampa Bay Derby. And so I thought, well, maybe the rail was the issue. And in my notes for the Wood Memorial, I did say, I said, escapes the rail might be a better effort this time around. Now, when I say might be a better effort this time around, I'm thinking, maybe the horse runs fourth or fifth. I didn't think he was going to win, that's for sure. So that was an incredible effort for Lord Miles. Horse that, like I said, had flashed some potential, I think, early down at Gulfstream Park for Saffie Joseph Jr. But that was just a crazy race, a very thrilling stretch run, a very thrilling finish between those three. Hit Show, I think, ran the kind of the race that he's able to run. And, he's going to earn probably a 92, 93 Beyer for that. He ran a 91 Beyer in the Withers. It's kind of the horse that he is to some extent, I think. But he showed a lot of grit, That's always tough being in the middle, sandwiched between two other horses trying to get through. That's tough. And he really fought on. He ran his race. And so that was a big effort, I thought, from Hit Show finishing second. And then Dreamlike, this is something when Andy Serling was on the Aqueduct preview that I talked about, the horse just hangs a little bit. And I kind of felt the same thing again where, he had the opportunity to win that race and just didn't. He likes kind of running with horses, not past them. And that's a concern, I think, for Dream. Like, obviously, very talented colt to be able to run third and such a close third in only his third career race at the Withers in a grade two, but it's still concerning, or I should say the Wood Memorial in his third career race. So, ultimately, Lord Miles to the Kentucky Derby. There you go. 100 points for you, sir. So he gets to go to the Kentucky Derby. Hit Show's obviously going to be going there as well because he had won the Withers and earned points already and then gets the second place points there. So I'm going to have a graphic in a little bit that shows you kind of where we stand right now as it relates to the Kentucky Derby picture. But that was, like I said, a really thrilling finish to see there in person. Then you go out west, the Santa Anita Derby. Wow. Some interesting performances here. First of all, right before the race even goes, we get the information the morning of the Go Rocket Ride scratches from the race. That was a horse I was absolutely in love with. If you watched my Santa Anita first look with Colin Sheehan, I absolutely love Go Rocket Ride. That was my top choice. I've been really banging the drum for this horse for the last couple of months, actually, since he broke his maiden. I thought this could potentially be a Derby horse. And I don't know what happened. I've not gotten a clear indication of why he was scratched. Mandela is very careful with his horses. So, maybe the horse spiked a fever. Maybe the horse, might have had a minor injury in the stall. Who knows? But was scratched. And the reason I kind of am a little, intrigued by this is because they were paddock training him the day before, and he looked like he looked like a beast the day before in the paddock. I mean, he looked like he was going to run them off their feet. And, it's too bad he wasn't able to run. So that already changed the dynamic. So now you had a favorite in Practical Move who became an even stronger favorite because his biggest competition in Go Rocket Ride scratched from the race. So Practical Move goes out and runs his race inside ground saving trip, sitting second flight, lets the early long shot speed horses go out up front, set those fractions up on the, pretty fast Santa Anita dirt, and then makes the inside move, comes for home. And you think at the top of the stretch, he's going to pull away. He doesn't pull away. And instead, he is confronted by both Skinner, the John Sheriff's horse, who we've talked about on the preview, and the Japanese import Mandarin Hero. And ultimately, the three of them finish boom, boom, boom with Practical Move holding off Mandarin Hero by about a head, and then also Skinner about a half a length back. Those three right there, National Treasure finishing fourth, kind of coming on late a little bit there, but a very impressive effort from Practical Move, who does get the win, sweeps that kind of California circuit, if you will, wins the Los Alamitos Futurity, wins the San Felipe, wins the Santa Anita Derby. So goes 3 for 3 out there in those Derby preps, gets the 100 buyer speed figure. That's back-to-back 100 plus buyer speed figures effort for Practical Move. Now, the question immediately after this is, can he get 10 furlongs? The question was, well, can a Practical Joke progeny, such as Practical Move is, can he get 9 furlongs? Well, he got the 9 furlongs. It was close, but he got the 9 furlongs. Now the question is, well, can he get the 10 furlongs in the Kentucky Derby? Well, we'll see. Getting 10 furlongs isn't easy for a lot of these horses. So Practical Move, I don't think, is alone in asking the question of, will he be able to get that distance? But there's a lot of horses who it's legitimate to go, will they get that distance? On a personal note, I'll just say I was happy to see Practical Move win. I like Tim Yakteen. He's a guy who I've come to like and respect a lot over the last couple of years. And I'm glad that he did it with his own horse. Because last year he was in the Derby with Taba and Messier. And there was a sense that, well, he just inherited these horses from Baffert and maybe he didn't deserve to be there to some extent. Practical Move is his horse. And that's been a homegrown horse of his and his wife's for this whole time. And they love that horse. And that horse he's a really, really, really good horse. And so I was happy to see that Tim Yakteen coming back to the Kentucky Derby this year with his own horse that he took from start to the Kentucky Derby. So excited for him, happy for him in that race. Now, the big news, honestly, coming out of the race was the effort from Mandarin Hero. And I made the comment on Twitter right after the Santa Anita Derby. I said, based upon what I just saw in the Santa Anita Derby, Derma Sotogake might win the Kentucky Derby by a pole. And listen, folks, it's hyperbole and I'm joking around a little bit, but I'm serious on this point. Mandarin Hero is a horse that was running on the secondary circuits, the NAR circuits in Japan. Those are kind of the more local tracks. So think of it as, if you think about California, think of it as running at Golden Gate or Los Alamitos rather than running at Santa Anita and Del Mar. Okay. That's kind of a comparison of the difference between the NAR tracks in Japan and the JRA tracks. The JRA, the Japanese Racing Authority, those are the big time national tracks. Okay. So Mandarin Hero was running at the local level tracks over there. Now, maybe you go, well, this might just be a reflection of the California Derby horses. But the fact that Mandarin Hero is running at local level Japanese tracks comes over a week before the race. Okay. So, it's not over here very long. It's not like he was acclimated to Southern California for a long period of time. Flies over the week before the race, gets in one work over the surface, and then runs his eyeballs out to finish second by a head, basically, in the Grade 1 Santa Anita Derby. That should tell you everything you need to know about the quality of racing over in Japan on the dirt. Okay. Now, I made this point when I was talking to Colin Sheehan on the Santa Anita First Look video. Derma Sotogake, who won the UAE Derby, is an excellent horse that runs on those Japanese Racing Authority, that highest national level in Japan. But here's the thing. Mandarin Hero, last time out, lost to a horse called Hero Call. Okay? Lost by a neck, going 1.1 miles. Barely lost. Okay? Hero Call finished fourth this previous race to Derma Sotogake. So Derma Sotogake is a very, very good horse who's easily beaten the horse that just beat Mandarin Hero before he came over to Santa Anita. And now, listen, it's a little bit of the transitive property, A equals B equals C, and that doesn't always hold up in horse racing. Horses on different days will run different types of performances, no doubt about it. Okay, I can already hear you typing away with those comments, and I agree with them. But it just shows you that kind of comparative strength of what's going on over in Japan. Now, the really cool part is Mandarin Hero might be sticking around here for a little bit longer. And there are some really interesting quotes that actually came out of their barn and the connections that we'll get to in a little bit. But that was a thrilling race. I thought Skinner ran a great race for third. And he's going to be in the Kentucky Derby as well, in all likelihood. He'll get into the Kentucky Derby. And speaking of that, let's actually take a look at the Kentucky Derby field right now. And this is the top 20 based upon points, as well as Continuar earning an automatic spot for being the Japanese representative for the road to the Kentucky Derby. So even though Derma Sotogake won the UAE Derby, Continuar is the Japanese representative for the road to the Kentucky Derby because of the races that he won in Japan leading up to all of these prep races. So obviously you can see Forte, your top horse in terms of points accumulated with 190. Then you go Practical Move, Angel of Empire, TAPIT Trice, Two Fills, Lord Miles, Derma Sotogake, and King's Barnes. Those are the horses with 100 or more points who've won those last round of preps. Then you get a pretty big drop off, and you see a bunch of horses that are all pretty close to each other. Raise Cane, Rocket Can, Hit Show, Confidence Game, Verifying, Sun Thunder, Wild on Ice, Mage, Blazing Sevens, Reincarnate, Jace's Road. All between 64 and 45 points. So they're all pretty closely clumped together. Okay. Now, here's the interesting part. This is where we stand today. There is absolutely no way that this is where we're going to stand in the first Saturday in May. There's going to be defections. There always are. Now, if you're looking at, well, who are the next 5 in? I feel like this is the NCAA tournament. Who's the next group in? Well, the next 5 in includes Skinner, in this order, by the way: Skinner, Cyclone Mischief, Major Dude, Mandarin Hero, and King Russell. Those are the next 5 horses eligible. So if a horse drops out, if one horse drops out, Skinner comes in. If 2 horses drop out, Cyclone Mischief gets in. If 3, Major Dude. 4, Mandarin Hero. 5, King Russell. So we're going to need to get 5 or more horses scratching out of this initial top 20 to get beyond King Russell. And so some of the names that you don't see on this list, a horse like Instant Coffee. And Instant Coffee only has 32 Kentucky Derby points, actually. really far down on the list. I think he's 27th, 28th. So he's going to need a lot of horses to defect if he's got any chance of getting in. So listen, this is the way it is. And when trainers don't run their horses very often, and then they don't run a particularly good race when in the race that they're in, then they get their one shot to get in the Derby. And if they don't get it, they don't get it. I mean, that's kind of where we are. So it's interesting to see, obviously, how everything has played out with the Kentucky Derby to this point. But that's the starting gate. And Colin Sheehan and I are going to have some more content coming out later this week, taking a first look and diving a little bit deeper into those top 20 horses. Well, listen, there were a lot of other races other than the Kentucky Derby preps. So let's talk a little bit about the Kentucky Oaks prep races, actually. And my big question when thinking about the Oaks prep is, does anybody want to win the Kentucky Oaks? Because I really don't know. It certainly doesn't seem like it. I guess at this point, Wet Paint, who swept the Oaklawn Oaks prep races, is your Oaks favorite at this point, because she's answered every question. She's rung the bell every single time out. Martha Washington, Honeybee, Fantasy. She swept that Oaklawn circuit. So she's got to be considered the leader in the clubhouse. What we saw over the weekend at Keeneland, at Aqueduct, at Santa Anita, more chaos. Out of Keeneland, in the Ashland, Defining Purpose for Ken McPeak holds off Punch Bowl and Julia Shining to win the Grade 1 Ashland. That was an amazing effort. Now, I'm not going to say that I told you to pick Defining Purpose to win, but I did give you Defining Purpose as a long shot I really liked in that race. I was going to go with Punch Bowl over Defining Purpose, ended up the other way around. Thank God you can box things. And so Defining Purpose, though, huge effort there. And that was a horse. And the reason I like Defining Purpose, she got off the slop finally. She's been running at Oaklawn on those sloppy sealed tracks, and it throws things off in terms of speed figures and the way that horses like to run. So she finally is back on a dry, fast track, and you would expect her to take a progression and a step forward from there. Now, I say that she only earned an 83 buyer, so it was not a particularly high buyer speed figure that she got. And, that's kind of just the state of where we are in this Oaks field right now. So that was Defining Purpose. Punch Bowl, I felt like Florent Giroux just did not get that horse out into the open until a little too late. And she was coming like a freight train at the end. And I was a little surprised she wasn't more aggressive on the lead, because they really let less Effortlessly Elegant just walk the dog up front a little bit. And I thought Punch Bowl was kind of not utilizing her best skill, which is her speed. Julia Shining, I thought the blinkers absolutely worked. But, I don't think she's going to be in the Oaks field now. I mean, this was her only placement in any Oaks prep race. So maybe, but it'll be close to see if she gets in. And then Wonder Wheel, I told you this in the preview, I just don't think Wonder Wheel is very good. And that's just where I was never completely sold on that horse. And she proved me wrong in a couple of big spots in the Alcibiades, obviously, and then in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. But you just look at those fields and they're just not very good. I mean, they just have not come back strong at all. And I think that's just an indictment of the crop. I mean, and that's not to say Wonder Wheel's not a good filly who's going to win some stakes races later on down the road. I think she can. But, if you're looking at who has this horse beaten, there's really not much there. So I thought Defining Purpose, obviously huge performance. Congrats to Ken McPeak. Congrats to Defining Purpose. Punch Bowl, I thought, ran a good race, but so close to getting that win. But it just showed a lot of ability, obviously, but regressed a little bit from a speed figure standpoint from last time out. And then Julia Shining, like I said, was much more forwardly placed. The blinkers definitely helped. Saez did not have to push her as hard, I think, throughout that race. She's still a little bit of a grinder and doesn't quite, you can tell she's just young and inexperienced, but she'll get there. She's good. I mean, she's very, very good. So that was what we saw out of the Ashland. Then you go to the Gazelle at Aqueduct on Saturday. My God. Chad Brown's two fillies. I was lucky enough to be in the paddock for that one. And both Sheeta Booty and Occult looked spectacular. I mean, you just looked at those two horses and you go, geez, they look amazing. I mean, Chad Brown can get them ready and he can have them looking good. Their coats were shiny. Their muscles are rippling. They just looked so compact, so good. And they didn't run a lick. Ultimately, the winner of the race, Promiser America, gets the win. That's the biggest price on the board over Gambling Girl. I'll be honest, Gambling Girl, when I was in the paddock, that was my top pick. And Gambling Girl in the paddock. I was talking with Sarah. I was joking with her. I said, geez, I don't feel very good about my top pick anymore. She goes, why is that? I go, her coat's kind of shaggy and scraggly looking. She's really gangly still. She hasn't really filled out. She's still a lot of legs, and she's not really muscle bound, and not really muscled up in a lot of ways. She's not puffed up. She's not dappled out. Like she doesn't show very well in the paddock. But she ran a hell of a race out there. I mean, she almost got there against Promiser America. And so Gambling Girl with a really strong second place effort. She's got a lot of talent, but just wasn't able to put it all together and finish second. But Promiser America, first win for the Handle Racing group, first graded stakes win, I should say, for the Handle Racing group. That was a big effort, obviously, for her. She's going to go to the Kentucky Oaks now. And that was, like I said, a huge long shot that earned a little bit of a better buyer, but it was still only, I think, an 85 buyer speed figure from that race. And then out at Santa Anita, it's what I told you was going to happen. Feza, the perfect 5-for-5 filly for Bob Baffert, romps in the Santa Anita Oaks and earns exactly 0 Kentucky Oaks points because she's not eligible to earn Kentucky Oaks points because she's still trained by Bob Baffert. So as a result, and Tell Me No Lies finishes a very distant second and will easily qualify for the Kentucky Oaks because she's finished second to Feza the last 2 times out. Now, if somebody asked me a question, they said, well, do the first place points go to the second place horse? No. Those first place points just evaporate into thin air if the horse that is eligible or the horse that earns them is not eligible to be entered. So the 100 points just goes away. So, and Tell Me No Lies earns 40 points for finishing second. Nobody gets 100 points, but that'll be enough to get and Tell Me No Lies into the starting gate of the Kentucky Oaks. She's a perfectly nice filly for Peter Miller, but I do feel like we are being robbed a little bit from Feza because honestly, she's probably the best looking filly that we've seen this year. And we're not going to see her on the biggest day for the 3-year-old fillies. Is she going to go to the Acorn? Good chance. And, I'd imagine that Baffert will get her in one of these other Triple Crown undercard 3-year-old filly races. And, we're going to see her in the distaff, I think, later this year. She's really good. She's really, really good. So, Feza earns a 93, I believe, buyer speed figure, which really is the absolute best of any filly that's routing Money's Gold, the 3-year-old filly for Todd Pletcher, who is a hell of a sprinter, has earned some huge buyer speed figures. But from a routing standpoint on the Oaks Trail, Feza by far and away has had the best speed figure of that group. So too bad we're not going to see her the first Friday of May. And Tell Me No Lies, the Peter Miller horse will easily be able to qualify for the Kentucky Oaks starting gate. Well, listen, that was a lot of Derby and Oaks prep, but there's still other big-time stakes races taking place this weekend. At Keeneland, we saw Corona Bolt win that Lafayette Stakes over Bob Baffert's Hijazi. I warned you. I said Baffert and Keeneland, not great statistics. This isn't Southern California. When he ships them in, they don't typically run quite as well. Now, Hijazi still ran a heck of a race that day, but Corona Bolt, he's the real deal. I like Corona Bolt a lot. And Brad Cox, I think that was a great job. And it's very similar to some extent what Chad Brown kind of did with Jack Christopher, where he gave him one shot routing, didn't work, go right back to sprinting. And that was the same thing with Cox and Corona Bolt. Gave her one shot to route. That didn't work. Let's get back to 6 furlongs, 7 furlongs in a sprint because that's what he's good at. So Corona Bolt looked great in that Lafayette Stakes, getting the win. The big news coming out of the Transylvania Stakes was the overwhelming popular choice. Carl Spackler scratches from the race the morning of. And then really that opens up things, I think, for the rest of the field. Mo Stash, a horse that I was a little skeptical about on the lead, was able to pull it off and was able to get a really nice ride, win that Transylvania Stakes. Nagarok and Web Slinger, the Grand Motion horse, and Web Slinger were both finished second and third. Those were Sarah and my top choices. So almost got there, but Mo Stash got us, and all credit to him for that one. Victoria Oliver had been, I believe, 0 for 19 in graded stakes races off Lasix up to that point. So good on her. 1 for 20 now. And so Mo Stash gets the win there in the Transylvania. Then you go to Saturday at Keeneland. Hear My Song wins over Hoist the Gold. And that was a really thrilling race. Here, My Song was a horse I mentioned on the stakes preview with Gabby Gaudet that I really liked. Was a horse that I thought might run well underneath, might be a useful horse to include in a pick sequence. Turned out that was the case. I was disappointed. Run Classic, who was my top pick, did not run particularly well that day. He ran, I think, fourth or fifth. I mean, it just was not there. He got the trip too. That was what was so disappointing. He got the exact trip I thought he was going to get, and then he just wasn't there coming for home. So disappointing effort there from Run Classic. Now, in the Appalachian Stakes, that's the one I was going nuts over because Papilio, my top pick, listen, she might not be able to run in a straight line, and she might be trying to look at the crowd the entire time she's running the race. But my God, is that horse fast? When she gets that turn of foot going, see you later. I mean, that was so impressive. Javier Castellano, congrats to him for that ride too, because my God, she was all over the place coming down the stretch. Thank God he got her outside. And I mean, you could see he was jerking her reins the whole time, and she's trying to look at the stands. He's trying to get her to run straight. She's trying to look at the fans. I mean, she's kind of all over the place, but it doesn't matter because she's just so talented. I mean, she was so much the best in that race. For her to have the trip she did, and the trip was fine, but for her to run the way she did down the home stretch and still win, I mean, it looked like Castellano was actually holding her back as they were crossing the finish line because he was still trying to get her to straighten out to some extent. It was an unbelievable effort there from Papilio. Second time out in North America. Again, this is where it benefits paying attention to European racing. When you go back and look at who this horse has run against in Europe, it's just a better caliber of horse than what we have in the United States. And so when a horse like Papilio comes over, you just kind of go, she's going to blow people out because she's run against such better competition than what we see here. So that was a really impressive one. Cairo Consort, I thought, ran a heck of a race as well with our Rad Ortiz Jr. aboard. She showed that great closing kick that she always did as well. Heavenly Sunday, nice little horse that I thought ran a really strong race up in the lead as well. So there were some nice efforts there. Then in the Madison, Goodnight Olive kind of plays with her food a little bit, but ultimately gets the job done and wins the Grade 1 Madison over Mary Quite Contrary, who, I'm a big fan of that horse, and I'm glad she ran as well as she did in that race. She finishes a close-up second by about a length and a half, and Goodnight Olive, though, kicks off the 2023 campaign now, I believe 7 straight victories for Goodnight Olive, and has just become the dominant female dirt sprinter in North America right now. So that's been really exciting. And then in the other stakes race at Keeneland on Saturday, Bad Beat Brian lives up to his name. Oh my God, folks. I thought we got a 40-1 home. Bad Beat Brian was a horse I mentioned in the stakes preview with Gabby. Really like that horse. My top 3 were Arrest Me Red, Bad Beat Brian, and Oceanic. They finished second, third, and fourth. Oh, and so Bad Beat Brian barely gets beat by Caravel, the overwhelming morning line favorite and post-time favorite, as she comes off the bench from that huge effort in the juvenile turf or the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint and wins a really contentious race in the Shakerstown Stakes and puts it back together and beats the boys again. Caravel is just on a roll right now. I think this shows you 2 things. One, if nobody pressures her on the lead, which they did not, if nobody pressures her on the lead, she can win these races pretty easily. I think it also shows you the relative weakness of this division once Golden Pal was removed from the equation. That Golden Pal was, an excellent horse, but he also kind of masked the mediocrity, perhaps, of the rest of the division of turf sprinters. And when he faltered in some of these races, you would get these quirky results. And you also realize there's a lot of just horses that are all kind of around the same ability there. And Arrest Me Red's a nice horse, but doesn't usually get the win. Bad Beat Brian at 40-1, I thought I was shocked he was 40-1, but I thought he was a very logical long shot to use. I thought he would be, 16-1 maybe. I thought, he might float up a little bit, but I thought he was a really good horse. And then Oceanic, another 15-1 morning line horse that went off at a high price. I think got bet down a little bit from 15-1. I think he went off at around 11-1 or 10-1, but still, these are, that's kind of where we are. Artemis City Limits didn't really show up at all, which I didn't expect Artemis City Limits to show up. did run a pretty nice race for Wayne Catalano. I think finished fifth and it was close up. So, there were some interesting efforts there, but ultimately, like I said, it just shows you the dearth of quality in that turf sprint division. And this might just be something where Caravel can just go against the boys on a regular basis now and just be expected to win. Because, you know, maybe she gets nabbed by a long shot here or there, but she's absolutely proved that she's belonged. And that's so interesting to me because she's a filly that really struggled against the boys the first 4 times she went against them, where she was just banging her head against the wall, not running particularly well, was not particularly competitive. And that's why that Breeders' Cup effort came out of really nowhere for her to be able to win that race. But clearly she is really coming into her own right now for the Brad Cox barn. Well, at Aqueduct, there were a couple of other stakes races besides the Derby and Oaks Prep races. Joey Freshwater gets the win for Linda Rice in the Bayshore over Gilmore and Victory Way. Good win for Linda Rice, and that barn historically has not been very great at when horses switch off of Lasix in stakes races, but was able to do that convincingly in the Bayshore. I thought held off expected value. The two of them had a really thrilling stretch run. Gilmore kind of sneaks up to get second at the last second as well for Brendan Walsh. And then in the Carter handicap, that lost a little bit of shine because White Abario scratches, spikes a fever prior to the race and is scratched. And everybody thinks, okay, well, now it's time just to single repo rocks. Jamie Ness has made Aqueduct his personal playground with this horse. Well, not so fast, my friend, because Doppelganger for Brittany Russell launches a huge upset and beats Repo Rock in the Grade 1 Carter handicap. And I got to be honest, I was lucky enough to be in the paddock for that one too. Doppelganger looked the part. I mean, he looked really good in the paddock. I didn't think again, there are other people who are better physical handicappers than I am, but I will just say he looked the part in the paddock for sure, puts it all together. And I couldn't be happier for Brittany. She's a great Mid-Atlantic trainer. I've run into her a bunch of times at Laurel. She and her husband, Sheldon Russell, they're really nice people. I always root for them. They're connections that you trust. They're good horse people. And so it was great to see Doppelganger get that win for the Russell team in general. Well, that'll do it for race recaps, but just very quickly, some horse racing news that we have. So Derma Sotogake and Continuar, the two Japanese horses, have officially shipped over to Churchill Downs. They are there on the track. They actually were out on the track on Sunday morning, just getting their first feel for the dirt of Churchill Downs. So we're going to continue to check their progress. I also mentioned Mandarin Hero, the horse that finished second in the Santa Anita Derby, is planning to stick around. They canceled their flight back. They were supposed to fly back on Tuesday. They canceled it. They said, we're either sticking around for the Derby, or if we don't get into the Derby, if other horses don't scratch out of it and don't defect, we're going to the Preakness instead. But they're running, folks. So I love it. I love to see it. I love the international nature of racing. And I think we also have to really start taking into consideration how good these NAR horses are that come over from Japan. That it's not just the JRA horses, that we have to look at this kind of second tier of Japanese racing as pretty legitimate. Ushba Tesoro, who just recently won over in Maidan, came out of that NAR circuit. Marche Lorraine, who won the Breeders' Cup, came out of that circuit. And now you have Mandarin Hero coming out of that circuit and running so well in the Santa Anita Derby. There are good horses coming everywhere out of Japan. Now, what do we have coming up this week? We got barn tours that Colin Sheehan and I are going to start doing for all of the major barns when they're Derby and Oaks contenders. We're going to have a Kentucky Derby first looks. I'm going to have some stuff focused on Keeneland and Oak Lawn this weekend because we still got some great races coming up. So plenty of stuff here on Trust the Profits. So make sure to press that subscribe button. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle @Failed to Menace. Like this video, comment below with your biggest takeaway from the weekend. Folks, we've gotten through the Kentucky Derby prep season. And now the fun starts. Now we get to talk about the Run for the Roses. Until next time, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.